My sister called my business worthless. Then I told she the sale price. The glowing holiday decorations inside my childhood home did nothing to warm the freezing temperature at the dinner table. After 11 years of complete exile, I sat silently near the flickering candles while my relatives exchanged arrogant stories about their corporate achievements. They treated my quiet presence with the same dismissive tolerance they had used to break my spirit during my teenage years. My older brother, Nolan Vance, swirled his expensive wine with a smug smirk before looking directly into my eyes to ask if I was still running that adorable little graphic design project down south. My mother let out a soft, mocking chuckle under her breath while my father simply shook his head in disappointment. They expected me to swallow the insult with a polite smile, change the subject, and accept my usual role as the family failure. Instead, a wave of absolute clarity washed over me as I calmly rested my silverware against the porcelain plate. I looked across the table and informed my brother that I had actually just finalized the sale of my firm. Nolan laughed instantly, the hollow sound of a man who desperately needed to keep me beneath him to validate his own fragile ego. He leaned forward aggressively, demanding to know how much anyone would possibly pay for such a worthless little hobby. Before revealing the life-altering number that would forever silence their laughter, I found myself reflecting on the deep emotional wounds that brought me to this exact moment. Growing up, my parents, Arthur and Madeline Vance, only showed affection toward achievements they could boast about to their wealthy country club friends. Nolan was the golden child because he studied corporate finance and spoke the language of ruthless ambition that my father understood. I was always the artistic outsider, spending my weekends teaching myself brand strategy and corporate identity systems from old library books, while my family openly ridiculed my passions. The definitive breaking point occurred during a summer gathering when I was 23 years old and announced my plans to relocate to Dallas to launch my own independent studio. My father roared with laughter, telling me that failing far away from home might finally force me to face reality. My mother warned me never to call them begging for financial assistance when my ridiculous dream inevitably collapsed, while Nolan raised his beer to toast my future bankruptcy. I stood there holding my plate in absolute shock, realizing that if I did not escape their toxic circle, they would manipulate my reality until I became as small as they believed I was. I packed my car the very next morning without a single goodbye and drove toward Texas to build a completely independent life from scratch. The initial years in Dallas were defined by exhausting heat, crushing anxiety, and a tiny studio apartment located above a noisy commercial bakery. I worked from a dented second-hand desk, accepting every low-paying contract available, from designing product labels for local soap makers to drafting pitch decks for small tech startups. Privately, I constantly battled the cruel voices of my family echoing in my mind, telling me that no serious corporation would ever trust an unproven creative girl. 3 years into the journey, tragedy struck when my largest corporate client was suddenly acquired and the new management terminated my contract overnight, wiping out nearly half of my annual revenue. Staring at my phone in the suffocating Texas heat, I felt a terrifying wave of panic as my family's mocking predictions threatened to become my reality. But instead of surrendering to the humiliation, the fear made me completely meticulous, as I spent 6 weeks working 18-hour days to rebuild my pipeline. That grueling hustle saved my business and caught the attention of local founders, who began praising my unique ability to turn complex corporate identities into highly profitable market leverage. My solo practice eventually evolved into Meridian Strategy, a highly specialized branding agency focused on scaling consumer goods and founder-led businesses before major funding rounds. Around that time, I married a brilliant software engineer named Julian, a man who cherished my intelligence and quietly encouraged me to make it impossible for my family to ever look down on me again. We built a beautiful, stable life together filled with quiet mornings, mutual respect, and a dedicated team of designers who trusted my leadership implicitly. Outwardly, I had completely moved on, yet a small part of me still wondered how my parents would react if they were forced to face the truth of my success. The ultimate turning point arrived when a massive private equity firm based in New York quietly approached me after tracking our unparalleled client retention rates. What followed were months of intense financial audits, grueling legal reviews, and high-stakes negotiations that took place entirely behind closed doors. When the final contracts were signed, the acquisition value was structured at $170 million, a figure that completely redefined my entire existence. Less than 48 hours later, my mother called out of nowhere with a syrupy voice, claiming the holidays would not be the same without me, and against my better judgment, I agreed to attend. Walking back into my parents' house on Christmas Eve felt like stepping onto a theatrical stage designed to trigger my deepest insecurities. Nolan was already performing for the room, loudly boasting about his real estate investments, while my father practically glowed with pride, and my mother eagerly refilled their glasses. I kept my promise to remain entirely reserved, giving vague answers about my work being steady, which they immediately misread as validation that my life was still completely unaccomplished. They comfortably settled back into their old patterns, entirely unaware that their patronizing amusement was about to be shattered by an undeniable reality. During the main course, Nolan delivered the final insult, asking with an arrogant grin if the real world had finally caught up to my little Texas business. I matched his gaze, calmly stated the exact sale price of $170 million, and watched the smug smile vanish from his face instantly. My father froze with his glass suspended in midair, while my mother blinked in stunned confusion, paralyzed by a number they never could have imagined. I pulled up the certified wire transfer and legal closing summaries on my phone, passing the screen to my father, whose expression twisted from deep skepticism into absolute horror. Nolan slammed his chair back against the hardwood floor, furiously demanding to know how anyone could receive that much wealth for simple artistic branding. I looked at my shattered family and informed them that the historic payout was for building the exact company they had spent over a decade calling completely worthless. My mother pressed her hand to her chest, tearfully demanding to know why I would hide such incredible news from the people who raised me. I quietly explained that because they had spent years mocking the first draft of my life, they had legally forfeited any right to be invited into my final chapter.